Thank you for coming. Today we are doing the vacant land offer to purchase, and I am actually just going to replay the training that I did on it a year ago. I was playing this to refresh my memory and just take some additional notes, and I was like, I cannot say it any better than this. So I'm just going to replay this. I got pretty detailed with this one. So I'm just going to play it. And at any time, if anyone has questions, we can pause it and address those. So here we go.
We have recognized, obviously, per requests from a number of you, that we need to go over the vacant land offer to purchase. And the biggest takeaways that I want everyone to get out of this is that we do not need to be experts on the vacant land offer to purchase, in that there's not a standard way for filling these out. I mean, it varies so much depending on what type of land your buyer is putting an offer in on. There might be a ton of homework that you need to do before you even draft the offer to purchase. Again, depending on what the buyer's proposed use of the land is going to be, whether or not there are government programs applied to the program or to the vacant land. Sorry, I've got to keep an eye on the participants joining. So again, it's just not as straightforward as a regular offer to purchase or a condo offer to purchase. And that's helpful to know so that you're not kind of in a panic when you're going to write these out, right? So it's good to kind of have that comfort, I guess. So, and then on top of that, depending on the different government programs or restrictions or kind of the nature of what's going on with the land itself, there are a number of things that could be going on with it that, again, you do not need to be experts in on. And the offer to purchase, as you'll see, will kind of point us in the direction of where we need to go to find out what we need to know for our buyers. So
it's on vacant land, isn't it?
So, okay. So I'm also then, on top of all of this, I'm only going to go through the sections of the offer to purchase that are unique to this condo or unique to the vacant land offer to purchase. So you'll see there's a lot of similar provisions and contingencies as our regular offer to purchases, which, like the first 2 pages, all of this should be familiar to everybody. Occupancy, property condition representations, closing prorations, all of that is standard to our offers. So the first provision contingency that I'm going to go over is the government programs contingency, which is the first section that is unique to the vacant land offer to purchase. So this is kind of similar to the condo doc review period or condo doc review contingency in a condo offer to purchase. So if you want to think of it like that. So I'll just go ahead and read it. Seller shall deliver to buyer within blank number of days of acceptance of this offer a list of all federal, state, county, and local conservation, farmland, environmental, or other land use programs, agreements, restrictions, or conservation easements which apply to any part of the property. And then it goes in to describe the types of government programs that a land could be subjected to. So farmland preservation agreements, farmland preservation or exclusive agricultural zoning, use value assessments, forest crop, managed forest land, conservation reserve program, wetland mitigation, shoreland zoning. So the buyer is this gives an insight into what kind of programs the land might be enrolled in that may affect the buyer's proposed use of the land. So we are requesting of the seller to provide to us a list of all of these programs that the land could be subjected to. On top of this, in the vacant land property condition report, there are questions about these. So these are things too that the seller should be disclosing up front. But if we want to make sure that we have all of these, all this information in hand, we would want to use this contingency. So then once the seller provides a list of all of the programs to the buyer, then the buyer, and this is upon actual receipt, just like the condo doc receipt, the buyer then has 7 days to review the types of programs that the land might be in. And then if they choose to, they can terminate the offer based on what they find. So another reason why, kind of a big reason why a buyer would want to know the types of programs that the land could be subjected to, not just from proposed use, but enrollment in these government programs gives the owner tax subsidies and other incentives. And if a buyer needs to unenroll based on what their proposed use is of the land, I'm just gonna do a quick check. Sorry for participants who are coming in late. So depending on what the buyer's proposed use is of the land, if they need to unenroll the land in any part of it or all of it, there might be tax implications or penalties for the current owner and then possibly the buyer. So that's kind of the biggest reason why someone would want to know if this is enrolled in that. And then there's also a warning to a buyer as to what I had just stated. So the buyer, so on line 107, if the buyer does not terminate this offer, buyer is hereby agreeing that the buyer will continue in such programs as may apply. And buyer agrees to reimburse the seller should the buyer fail to continue any such program such that seller incurs any costs, penalties, damages, or fees that are imposed because the program is not continued after sale. Parties agree this provision survives closing. So these penalties can happen well after closing. So just again, buyer and seller need to understand, mostly buyer needs to understand that if they take it out of these government programs, then there could be penalties that survive closing. And they might be dealing with this years on out. So, and then next section, the managed forest land. So this isn't a contingency mode so much as it is that if the land is in the managed forest land program, then this needs to be checked to give the buyer some information about it. So the managed forest land. So all or a part of the property is managed forest land under the managed forest law. This designation will continue after closing. Buyer is advised as follows. The MFL is a landowner incentive program that encourages sustainable forestry and private woodlands by reducing and deferring property taxes. So this managed forest land law encourages sustainable forestry. So there are restrictions on the owner that they cannot cut down trees. I think this is the biggest key with this. When ownership of land enrolled in the MFL program changes, the new owner must sign and file a record of the change of ownership on a form provided by the DNR and pay a fee. By filing this form, the new owner agrees to the associated MFL management plan and the MFL program rules. So again, if it's already currently in the managed forest land program, buyer must keep it going and must stay in it. And so it's just a warning to them. And then if they have any questions about it, and this, we're gonna find this a lot throughout the offer, for more information, call the local DNR forester or visit the and then it gives the web address. So the offer to purchase points us in the directions of these resources that we can learn more about what it means to be in these types of programs. So rely on these and point your buyers to the direction of these resources so that if there are questions about what it means for them to buy a piece of property in, let's say, a managed forest land program, then they'll have that information. So again, it's not a contingency so much, it's extra information for them if the land is subjected to the managed forest land program. And another comment that I want to make, maybe I don't need to make this, but you know, a lot of this too is just to make sure you guys are familiar with these types of programs and the information that the buyer might need to start thinking about before they write an offer. So just having it kind of in the back of your mind to think about these things when you're showing a property, you know. So the next section, page 3, is an informational section for buyers. And again, there is a reference point for each resource named at the end of each section. And all of this information might inform how a buyer writes the offer to purchase as well. So there might be additional contingencies that arise out of this information that we might need to think about including into our offers. So the first section, lines 121 to 124, fences. So this is a very old law, apparently dates back to 1871. Then this applies to agricultural land. So Wisconsin Statute 90 requires that owners of adjoining properties to keep and maintain legal fences in equal shares where one or both of the properties is used and occupied for farming or grazing purposes. Sorry, one more check. Caution, consider an agreement addressing responsibility for fences if property or adjoining land is used and occupied for farming or grazing purposes. So this is stating that if there is agricultural land and the adjoining property is not agricultural and not used for farming, it still maintains that both neighbors have to maintain the fence equally. So if there is a concern from a buyer, or if you are looking at land that's next to land that is used for agricultural purposes, you might want to include in your offer to purchase that it might be contingent upon seeing the current fence agreement between the two neighbors, right? So again, just kind of having it in the back of your head that this might be something that you need to think about for your buyer. Use value assessments. So this applies again to agricultural land only. The use value assessment system, this is line 125 to 129. The use value assessment system values agricultural land based on the income that would be generated from its rental for agricultural use rather than its fair market value. When a person converts agricultural land to a non-agricultural use, that person may owe a conversion charge. To obtain more information about the use value law or conversion charge, contact the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. And it points us to another web address. So this would be for somebody who is writing an offer on agricultural land and might change and take it out of an agricultural land status, and there might be penalties owed for the buyer. Again, they just need to be aware that that might be something that they'll have to tackle. And again, pointing you to the DNR, the Department of Revenue, for more information. Line 130 to 133, the Farmland Preservation Program. This is, let's see here, rezoning a property zoned farmland preservation to another use, or the early termination of a farmland preservation agreement or removal of land from such an agreement can trigger payment of a conversion fee equal to 3 times the Class 1 use value of the land. Contact the Wisconsin Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection Division of Agricultural Resource Management or
Vacant
visit.
land transactions.
Oh. I'm sorry, was there a question? I might have been somebody taking the phone call. Again, just informational for the buyer to take me out of here. Informational for the buyer that if you are writing on an offer or writing on land that's in the farmland preservation program, that the buyer needs to be aware of penalties that if they plan to change the use. And jump in at any time, guys, if there are questions, please. I will try and answer them as best as I can. The Conservation Reserve Program, so lines 134 to 138. The CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, encourages farmers through contracts with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to stop growing crops on highly erodible or environmentally sensitive land and instead to plant a protective cover of grass or trees. The CRP contracts run for 10 to 15 years and owners receive an annual rent plus 1/2 of the cost of establishing permanent ground cover. Removing lands from the CRP in breach of a contract can be quite costly. For more information, call the State Farm Service Agency office. So I think the biggest takeaway from that is if there is land that is in this CRP program, it's lengthy contracts. So they run for a long time, 10 to 15 years. That's very long. So if someone is wanting to do something immediate, they need to be aware of that. Shoreland zoning. So more applicable to Lake Country for sure, obviously. All counties, this is lines 139 to 145. All counties must adopt shoreland zoning ordinances that meet or are more restrictive than Wisconsin Administrative Code 115. County shoreland zoning ordinances apply to all unincorporated land within 1,000 feet of navigable lake, pond, or flowage, or within 300 feet of a navigable river or stream, and establish minimum standards for building setbacks and height limits, cutting trees and shrubs. So if someone wants to develop land that is on a body of water, they need to understand about, the buyer needs to understand the zoning ordinances. And really understand them. And this will, I think a lot of this would be in conjunction with a builder having a really good understanding of these as well. On top of knowing the shoreline zoning laws, it would have to be subjected to approval of the builder being able to build. So, and then rules about what you can do with existing structures. So I think a lot of existing structures are obviously grandfathered into this. Anything built before these were enacted. And then again, a line here to point us to more information if we have more information, if we need more information.
Just a minute, Baxter.
Does anybody have any, my Lake Country people, do you guys have any examples of writing out vacant land that's on a lake and the way you've had to go through? No? Okay. I will keep moving on.
Yeah, and let me just add in here, this falls under, competency of writing an offer. If you're working on the North Shore and you get an opportunity to write an offer on vacant land out in Lake Country, and you're not aware of these restrictions or shoreland zonings and all of this, please seek out someone who can assist you in your offer. You really can't write on these blind without really understanding what the restrictions are and what the information is. So
Mm.
use another agent who's practicing out in this area. Make sure you research what the restrictions are, but have some kind of backing to your offer and don't write it off the cuff.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to comment, these notes that I have along the left-hand side of our screen, I have those that I can email to anybody who wants them. So just let me know. I've emailed these out a few times to people with questions. So, all right, I'm gonna hit play again.
Just informational for the buyer. And then based on what they're writing on, this could inform any additional contingencies that they might want to include into the offer to purchase. I'm not going to go through this next section line by line, but starting on line 163, it starts to describe just, and this is similar to the condo offer to purchase and residential offer to purchase, conditions affecting the property or the transaction. So just like these next lines mimic, or just like they do in the offer to purchase, these lines mimic the vacant land property condition report. So anything that's addressed here is addressed in the vacant land property condition report. So you want to see all of the types of things. All right, then we get into the financing contingency. This all again should look familiar to everybody, laid out the same way. The appraisal contingency. Definitions are continued on page 5. Deadlines, what a defect is, what a fixture is. Then we hop back into the pieces that are unique to the vacant land offer to purchase. So the next section that I want to point out is the property development warning. This is just a warning to the buyer stating that if you're going to change the use of it, the property of the vacant land from its current use, that there's lots of things that they need to think about. So again, making sure that the offer reflects any contingencies that address the buyer's needs, and just making considerations for the things that need to be on the buyer's radar depending on what they want to do with the property. So starting at line 297, if buyer contemplates developing property for a use other than the current use, there are a variety of issues which should be addressed to ensure the development or new use is feasible. Municipal and zoning ordinances, recorded building and use restrictions, covenants and easements may prohibit certain improvements or uses and therefore should be reviewed. Building permits, zoning variances, architectural control committee approvals, estimates for utility hookup expenses, special assessments, changes for installations of roads or utilities, environmental audits, subsoil tests, or other development related fees may need to be obtained or verified in order to determine the feasibility of development of or of particular use for a property. Optional contingencies which allow buyer to investigate certain of these issues can be found at lines 306 to 350. That's the proposed use contingencies that we're about to get into. And buyer may add contingencies as needed in addenda. Buyer should review any plans for development or use changes to determine what issues should be addressed in these contingencies. So big old warning for us and for the buyer. All of the different variables that we need to consider depending on what they want to do. So beginning on page 6, then we're going to get into the proposed use contingencies. I've got these notes here. I'll send these guys to you guys after the training. Just a quick summary of everything. So the proposed use contingency. So you're going to spend most of your time with the buyer here and going through these. Again, will these contingencies be enough, or will you need to write in more? So on lines 307 to 308, buyer is purchasing the property for the purpose of, and then you would write in there what the buyer's intention is. So it does give an example here. An example is 3-bedroom, single-family home. It could be as simple as that. The optional provisions checked on line 314 to 345 shall be deemed satisfied unless buyer within blank days of acceptance delivers her written notice to seller specifying those items which cannot be satisfied and written evidence substantiating why each specific item included in buyer's notice cannot be satisfied. Upon delivery of buyer's notice, this offer shall be null and void. Seller agrees to cooperate with buyer as necessary to satisfy the contingencies checked at lines 314 to 350. The biggest takeaway from this, it's an immediate cancellation of the offer if a buyer's notice rejecting to any of these, to anything that they find based off of these contingencies occurs. So once that notice is delivered, the offer is canceled. And then as far as like the number of days you should put in on line 310, the biggest takeaway here is that there is no average length of time that you could put in there. So like with the financing contingency, for example, we know that, you know, it's typical for 30 to 45 days to put in there. So again, this kind of is just going to go hand in hand with the homework that you might have to do before you even draft the offer to give yourself enough time to address some of these contingencies. So just being aware of that and knowing that, again, kind of being reassured that it's okay that you might not know. And a lot of this, you guys, you know, just a reminder, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of communication and conversation with the listing agent on, and don't be afraid to ask them questions like, you know, especially if you're working with somebody who uses or who deals a lot with vacant land. They might have an idea on how long some of this stuff takes, but otherwise it's, you know, getting in touch with, you know, the wastewater treatment suitability, like the name of the contractor is escaping me right now, but you know, checking in with them, like, okay, we're going to include this contingency. How long do you think it would take to find out this information and whether or not the land is suitable for a septic system, right? This is an example.
Hey, Steph.
So, okay, then lines 314 to 345, you'll notice are all indented. So this is all part of the proposed use contingency. So,
Mary Beth, do you have a question?
I do. So if you're looking at some land that's already deemed residential, but it's just a lot in a subdivision, is there an average day that you would put in that proposed use then? Typically, because it's already zoned residential, you really don't have to go through
Mm-hmm.
from agriculture to whatever. I mean, is there, not really, a number?
Not that I mean, I can't say that there is one. I mean, if everything is already squared away, I don't know why you couldn't keep it a tight timeline, you know?
Okay, that's what I figured as well. So, okay, sounds great.
Yeah.
So each one of these like subcategories, the date of these all follows what you are going to put into line 310. So if you're putting in 45 days on line 310, the next subcategories all follow that 45-day deadline. So the first one is the zoning classification confirmation. This offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining at buyer's or seller's expense verification that the property is zoned. And then you would name what zoning you need, and that the property zoning allows the buyer's proposed use. So the biggest thing with this is that confirms what the current zoning is. which would be, relatively easy for a seller to provide and confirm what the current zoning is. But where this kind of could get more complicated is that as the buyer wants to confirm that they can do what they want to do based on the current zoning. So you may need to get a land use lawyer or a lawyer who specializes in land use involved at this point to confirm. Subsoils, lines 317 to 320. So this offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining at buyer's or seller's expense written evidence from a qualified soils expert that the property is free of any subsoil condition which would make the proposed use described impossible or significantly increase the cost of such development. So the subsoils testing, it should be pointed out that this is a test to determine that the soil is, that the building can be supported on the land. This is not environmental testing. And it was commented that some attorneys believe that this contingency could be used for environmental testing because it's kind of vague. Although it does not state anywhere in here, like testing is not described at all in these contingency lines. So it was suggested that if a buyer does want to do environmental testing of the soil, that it would probably be a really good idea to still include a separate contingency for that. But the subsoils contingency is for determining whether or not the land is going to support the building. Private on-site wastewater treatment system, so your septic system. So
I just want to make a quick comment that what I'm referring back to is the WRA training specifically on the vacant land offer to purchase when I refer back to comments. So just want to make that comment, make that clear. That's where I'm getting that information from.
Beginning at lines 321 to 328. This offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining at the buyer's or seller's expense written evidence from the certified soils tester that the soils of the property, that A, the soils at the property location selected by the buyer, and B, all other conditions that must be approved to meet the legal requirements in effect on the date of this offer to obtain a permit for the septic system. The septic system allowed by the written evidence must be one of the following that is approved by the state for use with the type of property identified at lines 306 to 308, and then check all that apply. Here is where, if you're not sure which type of septic system to put in, this would be a conversation back with an expert to find out, okay, this is what I want to build. What kind of system would be applicable here, right? I think the question you can check all that are. Check all just to make sure that yourself is covered. But I think it's a simple conversation with an expert to find out what type of system we're looking at here.
I have a question regarding that section.
Okay, hopefully we can answer it.
So if in the documents, they've already got a perk test done, and it's been confirmed that it's going to hold a conventional or a mound system, do we know how long? Everybody gives me a different answer, that testing is good for 10 years, that testing is good for 15 years. Is it recommended that we still check the wastewater treatment area on the offer? Because I don't want to flag an offer if I'm in competition when I already have the perk test done, but I don't ever know if I should be checking that to protect my buyer.
I think that's a question back to the buyer, like any of these. I mean, ultimately it's talking through that, right?
And on most perk tests, it will tell you how long this test is good for sometimes too. I mean, not all the time, but they'll give a, expiration on this test. Subsoil tests are, depending on who the contractor that did all of the testing, if you already have a perk test and it's already been established, that's what you get. And you can dig in deeper to see how long that lasts if it's not in the results of the test. But basically, that's what you're going to get, and that's what your buyer is accepting.
So if you had that test in there and you were writing the offer, would you check that box regardless, Joan, or would you just say?
You could just, you could also just put in that line that under other that buyer acknowledges receipt of perk test dated such and such. So you're tying your offer and your buyer's wishes to what he has received, and that becomes binding as part of the contract. So if the seller has delivered that perk test result, the buyer is now acknowledging receipt of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Welcome.
All right.
Easements and restrictions. So lines 329 to 332. This offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining, again, at buyer's or seller's expense, copies of all public and private easements, covenants, and restrictions affecting the property, and a written determination by a qualified independent third party that none of these prohibit or significantly delay or increase the cost of the proposed use or development identified at lines 306 to 308. So again, another point that a land use lawyer might need to be involved to interpret the findings of the title search. So just to be aware. Approvals, lines 333 to 337. This offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining expense at the buyer's or seller's expense, permits, approvals, and license as appropriate, or the final discretionary action by the granting authority prior to the issuance of such permits, approvals, and license for the following items related to buyer's proposed use. So this is where you would put in building plan approvals or other government entity approvals for licensees or permits. So a lot of times I know that builders will suggest putting in like a separate provision for, I think you guys have all seen this before, you know, the offer is further contingent upon builder approval within 14 business days. I talked to one builder who said that that was a pretty common thing that they would write in their additional provisions, but this approvals contingency, that should suffice. So I think they're just taking it one step further. But this is where you would address that.
I want to make an insert
Yeah.
in there too. Sometimes if the land is in a subdivision, you're going to probably need the approval of the association as well as the municipality approval. So sometimes it can get municipality approval, but the association members, or if it's still the developer who is the association, may not approve it. So make sure that you understand if you're buying in a subdivision, it could have two approvals needed.
Thank you.
For line 310, you might want to consider using a business days deadline in that section on that line versus just calendar days. Utilities. Lines 338 to 342. So this offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining at buyer's or seller's expense written verification of the following utility connections at the listed locations. So we're trying to find out where the utilities are located. And it was commented that a lot of agents have been sued for incorrectly stating where utilities are. But this can be a pretty expensive, for a buyer to to look into getting hooked up to utilities. So this might be something that's very important to them if you were not given that information up front, or if it's, yeah. So I would include this for sure.
One thing you can, one thing you can do here is through the listing agent or the seller, have these connections and the locations verified by the seller. So when you put, say, the gas is at the lot line or the gas is in the road, then you add maybe on that line per seller. So it's not like you, the buyer's agent, is representing that that's where it is. You're saying that that's where you got the information from.
343 to 345. This offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining buyer's or seller's expense, written verification that there is legal vehicular access to the property from the public roads. Pretty straightforward. Land use approval. So this now gets back into the typical formatting of the offer. This is still part of the proposed use contingency, but it does get its own deadline. And the reason for that is because this contingency might not kick in until the buyer gets more information based off of the prior contingency items. So once they have gotten through and once they've gotten through some of these, then that might inform whether or not they're going to move forward on the land use approval. So it would be typical that on line 349, this deadline days count would be longer than what's written on line 310. So I'll go through it. This offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining at the buyer's or seller's expense, a rezoning, conditional use permit, a license, variance, building permit, occupancy permit, or other, and delivering written notice to seller that if the item cannot be obtained at all within blank number of days of acceptance for the property for its proposed use described at lines 306. So if they can't get that final building permit, for example, they can get out of the deal through that contingency. Map of the property, so line 351 through 364. This would be the biggest example that I was given for this. So if buying land for agricultural land, it's hugely important to know the exact acreage of the property. So this offer is contingent upon the buyer obtaining of the seller providing a map of the property dated subsequent to the date of acceptance of this offer, prepared by a registered land surveyor within blank days of acceptance. So again, to kind of help inform what you would want to write in line 353, you could talk to a land surveyor and find out how long it would take for them to obtain this. Line 354, this map shall show a minimum of blank acres, a maximum of blank acres, the legal description of the property's boundaries and dimensions, visible encroachments upon the property, and the location of improvements, if any. And in line 356, an example could be the location of any bodies of waters. Additional map features which may be added include, but are not limited to, staking of all of the corners of the property, identifying dedicated and apparent streets, lot dimensions, total acreage or square footage, easements, or right-of-ways. Caution, consider the cost and the need for map features before selecting them. Also consider the time required to obtain the map when setting the deadline, as I just stated. And this also is similar to like the condo doc review or the government programs review. This contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless buyer within 5 days of the earlier of buyer's receipt of the map. It does not say actual receipt of the map in that, but it was commented that we should probably, the deadline for the buyer's review should kick in at actual receipt. The deadline for the delivery of said map delivers to seller a copy of the map and a written notice of which identifies the significant encroachment information materially consistent with prior representations or failure to meet requirements stated within this contingency. So it's 5 days of review. So again, depending on what they are putting an offer in, the type of land they're putting an offer in on, this map of the property might be, this contingency might be needed. So that is the last section that is unique to the vacant land offer to purchase. I do want to point out there is an inspection contingency included. I talked to an attorney at the WRA just to ask them like how, it's not very often that the inspection contingency is included. But if there is a building on the property, you might want to include this. So just another protection for your buyer. It might be the case that they're planning to raise the building, but maybe they would want to include this in case, again, they want another protection to possibly exit the offer if they need to. All right, I'm gonna stop my share here. So
Same. Okay. Back to reasonable skill and care. The vacant land offer to purchase is a lot. It's a lot. So make sure that you guys are asking questions and calling on our colleagues. If you do not, it's just a whole different animal. So, and again, just being mindful of the buyer's needs. And I think the biggest thing is if they're changing the use of the property, that's where it gets more complicated. So I will send those notes that I took out. I think I'll just hit everybody versus, I think I'm going to take some screenshots here and make sure. Any questions?
Yeah, I did. I was trying to follow along in my own printed copy, and I was noticing the lines don't align. The line numbers changed. I'm guessing that since you last did the training, the form has changed a bit. So they weren't coinciding with what was being referenced in the video. Just heads up on that.
Okay. I will go back through and line them up before I send it out. And we'll need to figure out. Yep. I'm gonna end it
Yeah,
there.
I'd also like to mention on the WRA site under, I forgot which section, legal or something, they have short, in addition to our videos, they have short videos on almost any topic you can imagine. And especially these contracts that were revised recently, like the vacant land, they have a video on explaining the sections just like that, but especially the changes that were made. They highlight the changes that were made from the older vacant land to the new one. Same thing with the other updated contracts. So it's really another good resource in addition to our videos and our trainings to check with those WRA legal update videos.
They also have, and at a cost, but in the WRA education section, they have line by line trainings on all of our contracts. So for example, in my preparation for the vacant land offer to purchase, because I do not know the vacant land offer to purchase as well, obviously, as the others, our standard contracts, I prepped with that. So, and they're accessible to anybody. So I would really encourage anybody I mean, it's time consuming, but it's coming straight from the WRA attorneys as well. So just a great resource that we have.
Yeah, WRA.org.
Yes.
I
Okay.
also did a lot of subdivision listings in my selling career. I listed, I think, 7 subdivisions in Mequon area. So I do have some expertise in the development of land and also subdivision sales and things like that. So call me if you have a particular question on vacant land,
Yeah.
vacant land deals.
I will call because
Got a
I
lot of up here.
I don't have familiarity with that for sure.
My tagline was Joan Reed outstanding in her field.
It's clever. I got it in the field.
Get
Yes.
it? I was out in the middle of an undeveloped land. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the March training calendar is out, so reference your or our resources website. And that's that. Have a great day, you guys.
Thanks, Steph.
Thank you.
Guys.